It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
Hey, welcome back to the program. We got Mr. Josh Waters is with us. Josh, how you doing this morning?
Hey, I'm doing pretty good, Paul. How are y'all?
Doing good up here. We really are. Now, listen, the task force, this is why you're on. You're on to give a task force update on the tax reform task force. But this is kind of the last update that happens directly after a task force meeting because it was their last meeting this week, right?
That's right. The task force is over. It has gone away by a matter of law. Some of the other task forces that are set up, they're kind of indefinite, but this one had a specific end date, and so they had their final meeting this week. They recommended out their last set of recommendations. They have really went over the fiscal impact of what they were proposing to do, and now it's just up to the General Assembly to see what they ultimately pass or don't pass.
So let's go over some of these recommendations. Let's talk about, because I've already talked with you a little bit here. We have a 4-year plan, a 3-year plan, a 1-year plan. I mean, what are they recommending lengthwise?
So the phase-in of the governor's 245.9 plan, that's the big income tax plan that came out of the tax task force. And so last meeting, the governor's office, or DFNA, put forward this 4-year phase-in, which covered about 5 fiscal years. Well, yesterday they came back, they met again, and they voted, and they actually voted to do a phase-in over 3 years. And so what this would be is the income tax rates in Arkansas. Right now there's 3 tables. It's really confusing and convoluted. It would take it down to 1 table, and it would lower the top rate right now, which is 6.9% in Arkansas for individual income tax. And over 3 years and 4 fiscal years, it would then drop that down to 5.9%. In the first year, it would drop from 6.9 to 6.5%. In the second year, it would drop to 6.2%. And then in that last year, it would drop to 5.9%. That was the income tax plan, and that's one piece of the pie of what's going to be what's in the draft legislation, what's going to be going out into the General Assembly.
Okay, so they're recommending. Now, this doesn't mean this is in any legislation, but the Task Force on Tax Reform and Relief is recommending a phase-in plan of 3 years. I have some of these numbers here. Joe, can we show? Let me show the right there. You see the governor's 2459 plan, and that's it says I guess that would be a cut in revenue of $47 million.
Yep, and those numbers are the first fiscal year. And so, what's all the fiscal impact statements that were presented? They have the draft legislation that they presented at last meeting. And then this meeting was, okay, what's the fiscal impact of that draft legislation? And so in the first fiscal year, those are the numbers you see there. Now, overall, when this is fully phased in, it's about $192 million phased in over. The impact will be felt over 4 fiscal years is the way the fiscal impact statement reads from DFNA. And so at the very end of the meeting, they actually had a vote, and at conduitnews.com, they FOIA'd the ballots, actually, and so you can see how each individual member of the task force voted their preference of the income tax plans that had been discussed.
I'm looking at this graphic here, Josh. It says there's a net tax increase for the first fiscal year. Tell us about that.
Yes, Paul, I think that's kind of the big takeaway right now. Unless something changes, if everything that was presented, that was draft legislation, that was part of the governor's plan, if all of that's taken into consideration and ultimately passes, we're looking at an increase of $38.2 million in the first fiscal year. That's a net tax increase. Now, what we talked about, the big piece, was the decrease, the income tax plan, in that first year, bringing the top rate 6.9 to 6.5, right?
Yeah.
So that's negative 47.4 million. That's really the big bulk of what the decrease is. However, when you look at the other draft legislation that the task force prepared and the fiscal impact statements that DSNA prepared for those, and you add them all up together, that's where we see the increase of 38 million. So I know you've been talking about it. We talked about it last time. You know, where's it going to land? You know, there's tax shifting. You're cutting here. You're increasing there. You know, where are the people going to be at the end of the day?
Well,
for the first fiscal year, right now, as things stand, it's a net increase of $38 million.
And I guess it's extremely frustrating because this task force was set up to do tax reform and relief on the people, and I remember State Representative Charlie Collins. I remember Senator Bart Hester. They wanted to go ahead and do this 2 years ago, and they pulled their legislation that would have attempted to make these, you know, some of this stuff immediate, and instead they said, hold on a second, let's have a task force and talk about this, and we'll do it right. And now we have this task force with these numbers. They're recommending the first fiscal year that they go through this a net tax increase on the people of $38 million more going to the government. Now, I thought at the very least, you know, they would try to keep it neutral, to keep government the same size. But I'm really confused here, Josh.
Well, I mean, you know, they can say, you know, people can lie or get confused or spin things, but numbers don't lie, and these are official numbers from the Department of Finance and Administration. These are numbers we're given, and when you add them up, you take the increases with the decreases, that's what we get. Now, I want to put a caveat on there because, like I said, there's a phase-in of this income tax proposal. And so in fiscal year 2021, the income tax reduction would be $71.8 million. You know, but Paul, even then, the way they've structured some of these others, so take, for example, the indexing of the motor fuel tax. In the first year, that's an $11 million increase. Well, by fiscal year 2021, that's a $22 million increase. And then fiscal year 2022, it's $32 million. So even when we look at future years, some of these, you know, impact statements didn't give, you know, impacts for fiscal year 2021. But we know, you know, if you're raising the internet sales tax now, okay, it's $32 million, and then next year they say $35 million, then there were no more estimates given. But if you extrapolate that out and you continue to do the increases with the decreases, you're seeing, you know, until several years down the road as certain triggers are met, you're seeing a lot of tax shifting and not a lot of tax relief.
Okay, so how many, according to their plan, if we do what they recommend, how many years does it take for the government to get less money? Does that ever happen?
Yes. By the time the full phase-in of what they're calling phase 3 of this overall tax reform plan, this would be things like eliminating the throwback rule, implementing the single sales factor apportionment, cutting the corporate income tax.
But that would be 2022, you're saying?
Yes. Well, the first one of those, the first fiscal impact of those is felt in 2023. And then the last one that they've impacted is fiscal year 2032 for the net operating loss carry forward provision. Now, Paul, we've got to put a caveat on those too, because the way they've drafted this legislation is those last few I mentioned there that are the bigger ticket items when it comes to less money going to the government, they have put some conditions on those. And the conditions are, one, that the net revenue coming in from income taxes has to go up 2%, multiplied out by the number of years and compare it back to the baseline year.
Oh, my gosh.
And the long-term reserve fund has to have as much money. And so really there's lots of things that can happen between now
economic
and when these
downturn, you know, I mean, I was just talking to somebody the other day, and we've had 9 years of a bull market. I mean, that doesn't happen very often. Okay, so we're talking with Josh Waters here, and we're going over these numbers. I want to read for some of you that haven't seen the graphic. If you're just listening on the radio, we want to give you this information. What in the first fiscal year? This is the Task Force on Tax Relief's plan for the first fiscal year. An increase in the capital gains tax, which would bring in $7.7 million. Repeal the tax credit for political contributions, which would bring in to the government $500,000. New fees on electric, hybrid, and alternative fuel vehicles would bring in another $600,000. The motor fuel indexing tax, which would bring in $11.3 million, which again would also guarantee that the tax would go up every year. Essentially, indexing to the price of inflation. As inflation goes up, they're going to keep making more money on gasoline purchases. Then you have the Tax Reform Act. Hey, what's the difference between the Tax Reform Act, Josh, and the governor's plan? Because both of those are in here. The Tax Reform Act would actually be a tax cut on that one thing of $1.4 million. Then the governor's income tax plan in the first year would be a cut of $47 million. What is the Tax Reform Act, though?
So the Tax Reform Act is really a hodgepodge, I guess, of 8 different tax proposals. A lot of it is not necessarily a big reduction up or down of revenue. And actually, the removal of sales tax on car washes was the decrease there, the $1.4 million. But this would do a couple things. One, it would say, okay, the franchise tax, okay, DF&A is going to take that over. There's a property tax provision in there that says the Assessment Coordination Department, okay, they're going to put out guidelines for counties in determining what properties may be exempt from paying property tax, nonprofits, that kind of a thing. It's going to say they have to report, tax exemption and deductions each year. One thing that's kind of different too is there's a couple of provisions in throughout all of this that it kind of switches things up. It removes an exemption or it adjusts the tax, and so that people kind of pay it up front, and then you can come back later and keep all your information and come back and apply for a rebate or a credit.
Okay.
And so it's kind of a restructuring.
So the next one is the governor's 245.9 plan on this list, which is, again, $47 million decrease in the income tax. Now, that's what I think everybody's going to focus on, is that they're recommending a big income tax cut here, another essentially $50 million. But then we get hit with an increase in the internet sales tax that will bring in another $32 million to the state. Then you get hit with the conformity with federal law tax increases. Part of the governor's overall tax plan is presented to the tax force. That's going to bring in another $28 million. So they want to conform Arkansas tax law to federal law where it will bring in more money. That's another $28 million. Removal of sales tax exemptions on magazine subscriptions, $2 million. A premium tax credit adjustment of $3 million, which means in the first year, if they do what they are proposing, the people of Arkansas will be paying $38,221,707 more in the first year, with the hopes that future legislators will continue this phase-in plan and not stop it, to where eventually, if the economy still does well, if the government's revenue still does well, we eventually will get relief in, 2024? And that would be 14 years after the Republicans took control of the legislature in 2010? Is that what's happening here?
Wow, yeah, I didn't think about it like that. Yeah, and Paul, I don't mean to make things sound worse than they are, but I think people should know, too, with the internet sales tax, that number you gave, that's state revenue. They actually did give an estimate for city and counties. That's going to be an additional $10.8 million in the first year to cities and counties. And so at the end of the day, that's $10.8 million that are out of the pocketbooks of Arkansans. These are Arkansans paying these, and into the coffers of some level of government.
Wow. Yeah. And here's the thing. I have a feeling that these numbers, Josh, that are out there about this first fiscal year, I can already tell. I think the people in positions of power will somehow try to I don't see how they can dispute the numbers, but they'll dispute something, I'm sure. But I just want to say to all of those, if there are those people out there, they're welcome to come on the program and have a conversation about this. But I think what is obviously clear here with these numbers is that they did the due diligence. I don't doubt that they looked over everything, but I think there's a lot of other bills coming due, and I think what they realized is if we're going to actually decrease the amount of money going to the government, we can't do it now. We're going to have to tell the people, well, we'll hopefully we'll do it in 4 years, or hopefully we'll do it in 3 years over a phase-in, because I really do think we just are not very healthy fiscally as a state. I think that's what's clear here with this recommendation, that they don't want to cut anything, cut any current spending and cut any current obligations. And so if they don't want to do that, then there's just no room for the people to keep more of their own money. And in this case, they're saying that we're over-obligated, so at least for the next year, we need $38 million more from the people.
Yeah, Paul, this is part of the sausage-making process, I guess you could say. At the end of the day, whatever the General Assembly passes is what will become law, and that'll be ultimately the fiscal impact.
And that will need to be analyzed independently of this, because you're right. This is not a law yet. This is just a proposal. Right.
But I think it's important for, people to know this is draft legislation. They have taken the time to draft legislation. These are fiscal impact statements based on that draft legislation. DFNA has run the numbers so that they know going in, okay, this is what we're looking at. So I would encourage people to go ahead and start reaching out to their state legislators and let them know, hey, I've heard we're looking at, some cuts, some increases, but overall net increase. If they don't want that, they need to let these legislators know now.
Yeah.
So as they're drafting and amending, legislation over the next couple of months, they hear that feedback from the people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Josh Waters, always great to have you on. We're throwing those numbers up on the screen once again. I'm sorry, I'm seeing the delay, but we threw those numbers up for you just now. And go to conduitnews.com. You can check out the analysis there as well. Josh, it's always great to have you on, sir.
All right, thanks, Paul.
Okay.
Have a good one.
Yes, great information. Not exactly what we were hoping for. I mean, I even I was I quit calling it a task farce sometimes. because a couple of we actually had a few headlines a couple of months ago about how they were recommending a net revenue decrease of $200 million and how positive that was. And so I was like, well, hey, I might be eating a big plate of crow here, and I would happily eat it, because that would mean there'd be more money in people's pockets. And I think that's why people vote for Republicans, because they believe in giving the government less money, not more money. But we'll continue to monitor this. But right now, it's not very positive news from a Republican Party platform point of view. But again, we'll continue to monitor it and keep you posted.